It had been 2 weeks since I'd spoken to Merle, and I was afraid. For months, I'd been calling my sister every few days, cajoling, threatening, using every carrot and stick I could to convince her to move to a facility that could care for her and where she might make friends for the first time in decades. Finally, she'd stopped answering the phone. Now 55 years old, she had been living on her own for the first time since my mother had died 2 years earlier. On December 27, 2005, after 14 days of silence, I rode the Metro-North train home from work in my Manhattan office, focused on the task ahead. As an addiction psychiatrist, I had spent the day treating people with depression, anxiety, and drug and alcohol problems. Over the years, I had received many notes of thanks from patients for saving their lives from the various addictions, but it had been years since I treated someone for schizophrenia. I lived a comfortable life, commuting between my Upper East Side office and a bedroom community in Scarsdale. The loving and stable home I'd created with my wife and our 2 children offered a complete departure from my chaotic childhood in Philadelphia. Now, the chaos was creeping back in. Despite all my psychiatric training and practice, I was at a loss for what to do about my sister. As the only other surviving member of our family, I was the last person left to care for her. Cancer had taken my father first, and later my eldest sister, Gail. Finally, my mother's passing left me in charge. I had been determined to find a reasonable plan for Merle's well-being, and had made arrangements with a convalescent home that could offer her a life free from the years of hoarding that had turned the house, where we grew up, into a hovel. But the longer my calls went unanswered, the clearer it became that I would have to betray my mother's dying wish that I never, ever call the police on my sister. I walked the mile from the train station to my home and dialed Merle yet again. Picturing the beige telephone that sat on the island separating the kitchen from the living room, where as a child I'd often watch TV while we ate dinner. I pictured the black phone that sat on the night table next to my parents' bed, the big bed, the comfortable bed, the bed on which I've jumped and played, the only bed near a TV, in the room with a bright view of the street, the room where Merle had recovered from her accident, the room where we'd had one of our worst fights, the room where she now slept. I knew that even if I could get the police to take Merle to a hospital, it would be nearly impossible to keep her there for long. I was well acquainted with the commitment laws, which dictate that you can't involuntarily hospitalize someone unless they declare themselves to be immediately suicidal or homicidal to an impartial evaluating psychiatrist. One of the few exceptions in some states is when a doctor swears that a patient is so incapacitated that they can't feed themselves, not even at a shelter, or by scavenging through garbage cans the way the estimated 194,000 unsheltered homeless and the 552,000 total homeless people do every day in America. Otherwise, it's illegal to admit someone to a locked facility for more than a few days of observation. I had heard there were ways to petition the court so that a relative could assume control, but that would require supporting paperwork, a court hearing, and a judge's determination. Pursuing that course was certain to incur Merle's wrath. But I was running out of options. It was not unusual for Merle to avoid me. In the 2 years since my mother's death, I had often called the emergency operator, who would report that the phone was off the hook. Call the police, they would suggest. No police, I thought. My sister would call me when she was ready. But this time was different. The phone was on the receiver.